Do you have trouble deciding what to sell? Should you sell high-priced items? Should you sell low-priced items? Somewhere in the middle? Well, this show is for you. If you ever try to figure out what to sell on eBay and the price point, we're going to talk about that in the next 45 minutes. Welcome to the Prof Sales YouTube channel. My name is Jason, otherwise known as Prof Sales. I normally have a sidekick here with me, just as Kaaren. She is in the other room, actually monitoring the chat feed. So she will be here in spirit and in the chat as well. And speaking of the chat, there's a live chat going on right now. If you want to be involved in this live chat, you can come in and be part of the show, interact with me and Kaaren as we're here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be glad to have you part of the show. If not, you can always leave a question or comment after this post, and we will be glad to get back to you and do our best to answer your question or your concern. We would love to hear from you. So if you're enjoying the content as you hear this, please hit the like button. We appreciate it. It lets us know we're doing a good job. And let's move forward. So the chat is filling up. And we're going to talk today a little bit about this idea about high-priced or lower-priced items. And I got to give a special shout out to my main man, Casey, the Rockstar Flipper, because Casey posted a question on my community tab here on the channel. Now, if you haven't seen that, a lot of YouTubers are starting to use that a little bit better. If you go to the main channel page for Prof Sales, you'll see there's a community tab. If you click on that, you can go on there and see certain posts and questions I've asked or polls. So I'm going to be using that to interact with you guys a little more, not just around a specific video, but also just in general. But I posted, I guess it was probably about a week ago, and I asked people, hey, what are some topics you would like to talk about? And Casey had posted a question talking about this idea of, hey, suppose somebody wants to source a couple hundred $15 to $25 items versus sourcing, say, 50 items that will sell for 50 bucks. What are some of the considerations? He's been thinking about that. And also, how does that play into returns, especially there on the high end? So I thought I would talk about that. Now, we've discussed this topic before on the channel, and there's different thoughts that I have about this topic in general, and it kind of takes into account a whole bunch of things. But today is Prof Math Day, so lucky for you, I have my trusty whiteboard, and I'm going to make it simple, and we'll also do a screen share too about what exactly this looks like, because for a lot of you may be confused about what should I sell when I start out. Now, I'm a big fan of selling in a niche, and a niche just means you find an area, a category, or even a subcategory that you learn a lot about it, you really mine the depths of it, and really do your best to understand it completely, so that way you will be able to make great decisions when you're out buying things. You'll be able to really price your items the best way possible to get the most profit in the least amount of time listed possible. But Casey's question was more about not so much a category or a niche. His question was more about, should you buy a bunch of items that'll sell for 15 or 20 bucks or maybe 25 bucks and get a whole bunch of them? Or should you focus on just sourcing less items, but they'll sell for a lot more money? And that brings up math. And I know a lot of you guys are probably like, oh, math. And sometimes I'm like that too, although rarely, let's be clear. But you have to have a little bit of a mathematical approach to this, or otherwise you really can't make sense. It's just sort of conjecture. If you just say, well, you should sell this, you should source that, and you have no numbers to back you up, it's really just your opinion then. And even though it may be an educated opinion, you can't prove it to someone else. And I'm just going to say it's going to be hard for me to prove anything in this. Like, I think it's very hard to prove anything in this world, much less which direction you should take with your eBay business. But I'm going to at least try to ask some of the questions that I think you should ask, depending on, if you want to take approach of selling lower cost items versus higher price items versus the time versus the effort and versus availability, how quickly they'll sell through, those sorts of things. So we're gonna talk about that. So let's jump right into it. So first off, let's make an assumption here. So this is what Casey had mentioned. He said, suppose you wanted to source 200 items, okay, a week. Now, show of hands in the chat, how many of you source that many items a week? 200 items a week. That's a lot of items. I would take a guess here and say that the majority of eBay sellers, resellers especially, do not source 200 items a week. That's quite a few. Now, if you are going to the bins and that's your primary method of sourcing, you could source 200 items a week, no problem. If you're going to thrift stores, it gets a little trickier just because you're usually not going to find that many in one store. So you're going to have to go to multiple stores. And remember, guys, time is the one thing that's always kind of either working for you or against you here. And when you have to drive from store to store to store to get 200 items is going to require multiple stores, which is going to take more time. But let's assume that this is your goal, is to go after 200 items a week, okay? So now I'm going to make another assumption here. We're going to assume that you pay $2 an item. Now, that may be high or low. Now, I know a lot of you are probably saying, Prof, there's no way I can get items that cheap. If you go to the bins, you can get them cheaper than that. If you go to thrift stores on special sale days, sometimes you can get them that cheaper. We're just making a number, guys. I mean, if it's a different number for you, okay. But I think if you, in most metropolitan areas, you can find stores that will sell that cheap. And there are thrift stores that run sales. Even the big major chains have days where they have % off and special sales. And of course, the bins would be even lower than that. So it's just an average. I don't want to get so hung up on that particular number, as more to do the actual example about what we're trying to figure out here. Okay, so now you know how many you've got to source. You know what it's going to cost you per item. So now the question comes in, how many hours a week is it going to take you to source? So we're going to write sourcing. So I made an assumption here that it's going to take you 10 hours to source that many items. Now that's 20 items an hour. And I know some of you are probably saying that's a lot, or some are saying that's not many. In my experience, once you become an experienced reseller and if you're selling in bulk, if you're buying in bulk and you're kind of running this bulk model, that is not a crazy number to source 20 an hour. In the bins, it could be much higher than that. In thrift stores, I can go into any thrift store around here and pull out 20 pair of jeans in less than an hour because I have the knowledge and the niche and so on. And I think as you get better and better at your niche, you will be able to hit that number. I think it's a real number. Some of you in the chat may agree, you may not, but I think you can easily source 20 items an hour once you're accomplished and proficient in your niche. How long is it going to take you to quality control them? You're going to get them home. You're going to have to look them over, make sure you didn't miss anything. This was an estimate of 2 hours. That works out to a bit more than 30 seconds per item. 30 seconds an item is 120 an hour. So that would be 240 in 2 hours. So roughly 2 hours to quality control. You're just going to look them over, make sure there's nothing crazy with them that you miss in the store, what have you. All right, so now you have to photo them. How long is it going to take to photograph? Now, here's where people are going to, I'm going to lose some people. You're going to go, no way. But I think you can do, I think that you can photo 10 per hour. And if you can photograph 10 per hour, that's one every 6 minutes, then it's going to take you about 20 hours to photograph that many. Now, some of you may go faster than that. I can go faster than that on jeans. Kaaren and I have proven it. We can get it about half that time, actually. Other things, maybe it's longer, but I think once every 6 minutes, once you're proficient, I think you can do it. And now you got to list them. So how long is it going to take you to list them? I think you can do 20 per hour without breaking a sweat. So you're going to use templates. You're going to use your knowledge. So it's going to take you 10 hours at 20 per hour to list them. What's the total time for all you guys playing along? 42 hours a week to do this, okay? Now, we're trying to source $2 items that we can sell for $15 to $25 average selling price. This is our model. Now, I don't know how many of you guys work. Does anybody here in the chat or after you're watching this video, do any of you work 42 hours a week in your business? And probably some of you do, maybe longer. That's a full-time job. I think we can all argue 42 hours a week is a full-time gig. You would have some time for other things, but not a tremendous amount of time. 42 hours is a full-time gig. And this is you just being one person. This does not include some other things that we've left out. It does not include packing and shipping. It does not include communicating with customers. It does not include anything like on the back end, like any of your behind the scenes stuff like accounting or tax preparation or anything like that, ordering supplies. So I think this is a realistic number to Casey's question. And I don't know if he sources 200 items a week. He may very well, so he can maybe speak to that. And I challenge anybody who's doing this, whether it's 50 items a week or 100 or 200, start tracking your time. Start tracking the actual amount of time it takes you to do certain things. Maybe it'll pleasantly surprise you. Maybe it'll be more than you thought. I don't know. But so remember this number. We're going to come back to that. So now we're going to go to the other example that Casey spoke about. So now we got another model. Now there's a lot of models in between here, but in this model, we're going to say we're going to source 50 items that will sell for roughly a $50 average selling price. Okay. Now that's a much higher average selling price. I know some of you do go towards this number, and this number, even in things like clothing, does exist, but that's gonna eliminate some items. There's a lot of clothing items that you're not gonna be able to source that will sell for 50 bucks. A lot of clothing items. There are some that will. Suits that will. There's certain vintage clothing that will. There's shoes that will. Dresses that will. Things of that nature. Certain ties would even sell for that amount. But we've got a lower number we need to get, 50 items. And here's what I'm going to say you're going to pay for them on average. $10 on average per item. Now, that is much higher than the other example, right? But remember, they need to sell for 50. So occasionally you're going to have to go to your places like Uptown Cheapskate or a higher end thrift and maybe pay up a little bit for an item. You might pay 15 bucks for an item that'll sell for 60. You know, so you're going to blow this average up. You're not going to, I don't know how easy it would be to find 50 $2 items that would sell for 50 bucks each on average every week. Possible, but I just don't think it's as easy as most people think. All right. So, all right. So here's the next bit of math for you for this. So let's figure out the time to source. We're going to give ourselves more time for this. So we're going to say this is going to take 10 hours. So we're only going to be able to get 5 per hour in this example. Now, remember in the previous example, we got 20 per hour. This one, 5 per hour. So we're nowhere near as efficient. There's just not as many of these items out there. Now, by the way, if you go into other niches like video games, electronics, things like that, those are other areas you might find $10 items on average. They'll sell for 50. All right, and yard sales, estate sales, so on. Quality control. So that's going to take roughly 1 hour, less than 1 per minute, or not even a little bit more than a minute per item to go through and check and make sure they're okay. Photograph. Photo 50, you're looking at 10 per hour, you're looking at 5 hours to photograph. And then list, you're looking at 20 hours. Excuse me, not 20 hours. I'm looking at the wrong thing. You're looking at 2.5 hours. Wow, that's a big difference. So how many total hours here? 18.5. Now, this is more like a part-time job, right? Now, on the surface of it, I think a lot of people would look and say, well, Prof, on the other example, I'm spending 42 hours doing this. And in this example, I'm only spending 18.5 hours doing this. This one is clearly superior, right? Not so fast, my YouTube friends, because you've got to remember one thing we have left out here. How profitable is this? What kind of money are we going to make? And when are we going to make it? Okay. And that's really the key to all this. Now, I want to see a show of hands in the chat. Which of you guys would rather do this model, the $50 model, or would you rather do the $15 to $25 model? So put in the chat, would you rather do the 50 or the 15? Would you rather do the 200 items or the 50 items? And you can even put why you want to do it as well. But this is where it gets a little complicated. And somebody's saying in the chat, you can use a spreadsheet and plug in the formulas, which you can to a point. But here's the challenging part. Here's the one variable you just don't ever really truly know. The sell-through rate. You can make some great educated guesses at it, but you're not going to be able to nail it 100% because there's all kinds of factors you just cannot totally control for. So if you were a brand new reseller and I just gave this example to you, which one would you take and why? Because there might be different reasons for it. Some of you may not have access to a lot of $10, $50 items. Some of you may have little access to like bins and outlets. So there's all kinds of different ways to look at that. And in the chat, some people are, Skip says he would do the 50. Shannon says I would do both, but I prefer the 50. Kaaren would do both. Duncan does a mix. Michelle says I'm doing Model A, the 200 item. I can go to the bins almost daily. C. Chandler says 50. No way I can source and list that fast. Grace Curley says 50 or both. So all kinds of interesting answers there. So let me give you my answer before I did this next step. This is where it gets interesting. I would have said on the surface, I would prefer this one. And the reason I would prefer it is because with this a limited amount of time I have to put into it, I can take those other 20 some hours and do something else. Or I could just do more of this potentially if I have access to enough items. But then, being who I am, I've got to take it to another level and say, well, but am I making any money? I mean, isn't that really the answer here? Like, are you making money for the hours you put in? Is it going to be worth it, right? And that's where it got interesting. And I remember Kaaren, after I did this, I told her, I was like, that's surprising. She's like, what's surprising? Well, what I found out next. So let's do a screen share. And I'm going to show you guys what I worked out with my sourcing comparison here. Okay. So we're going to be on the screen share for a moment. All right. And let me go back over to this. Hang on one second. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a spreadsheet I did kind of to show you the differences between these two. All right. So you should be seeing the spreadsheet now. So I have two models here. Okay. So here's our 200 a week model, right? And we've got here our items per week, which is 200. The amount we paid, which is 2. And we've got, I can put some yearly totals here. That means you'd have to source 10,400 items a year, and you would pay just under $21,000 for those items. Here's the amount of time you would spend to do it, 42 hours, or over the course of a year, 2,184 hours, if you did it all 52 weeks. All right, follow me so far? Now let's figure out what you would make. All right. So I came over here and I said, well, if you sell through at these different sell-through rates of 200 items per day, or 200 items per week, and you were selling through at a 0.25%, 0.5, 0.751, all the way up to 1.5, what would you make? And this would be how many you'd sell each day. And this, at a $20 average price point, this is what you would make each day. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Nice progression there, right? Or a weekly gross of 70, 140, 210, 280, 350, 420. And then I did the hourly rate. So your hourly rate on those items that sold for that week would be anywhere from a low of $1.67. Now, why so low? Because you put in an awful lot of hours. You put in 42 hours to get this number. And it's just, that's kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? You put in this amount right here, 42 hours, and you only got an hourly rate of this. Now, there's a caveat to this. You're not going to sell, you're only going to sell just a few items each week, right? To start at this low rate. You're going to sell half an item per day, it's 3.5 per week, about 15 items a month. And then next month, you're going to sell some more of those items, which that will keep pushing this hourly rate up, excuse me, because you haven't put any more time into those items, right? But when you start after that, the next week, let's say you source the 200 items, and then on Sunday night, you listed them all. And then by the end of the first week, your sell-through was this rate. You technically had only earned $1.67 per hour. Gross. That's gross. That's not even including eBay fees and taxes and things like that. That kind of stinks for most people, I would think. As you go up the ladder, it gets better and better until you get up here to at a 1.5% sell-through rate, which there are clothing sellers who sell at that percentage and maybe even a bit higher. Your hourly rate on that first week goes up to $10 per hour. Not anything really to write home about, but certainly better than 167. And remember, that's going to keep going up because more of these items are going to sell in the second week, and even some more are going to sell in the third week, and so on. So I don't know. That does not seem that great. So I thought, after seeing that, that certainly the next example has to be a lot better than that. So now let's go to the 50 item example. So your 50 items per week, it's $2,600 a year. You've got to spend $26,000. So that's more capital you've got to invest. But here's your sourcing time. I don't know why that says, 23.5 hours. Why does it say 23? Oh, because I think I got the wrong, because I've got the wrong number right there. Let's do that. 18.5 hours per week and 962 hours a year. So like a half a year's worth of hours. And again, the same math over here at 0.25% items per day, 0.5, 0.75, 1% sell through, and so on and so forth. So here you see your daily totals. And here is your weekly totals you would make. 43.75 at this sell-through rate, 262.50 at this sell-through rate. So, okay, what's the hourly rate look like? Not that much better. The high end, $14.19, the low end, $2.36 per hour. I got to tell you, I was a little shocked to see that, guys. I was a little shocked when I went, wow, even selling the $50 an hour items doesn't help your hourly rate that much in the first week. Now, it's mainly because you've put so many hours into this right off the bat, but even without that, it's still not a great hourly rate. And remember, this is before expenses on eBay and taxes. So you have, we're just looking at the top end. I don't think you're going to sell through at this rate. I think you're going to sell in here somewhere. So your hourly rate after that first week might be below $10 with this model and it's certainly below $10 an hour with this model. Oh, man. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I mean, I was not exactly thrilled to see that number. I don't know about you guys, right? I mean, neither model really provides you with a lot of hourly rate. Now, again, you know, when you buy 100 items, eventually you're going to sell like, you know, 10 of those right away, and you're going to sell 6 more later, and then 3 after that. I mean, you're going to sell them over time, and you're only going to put the time into them once, theoretically, to source them, to list them, to photo them. But your hourly rate at the beginning sucks. I don't know any other way to say it. Like, that's not a great hourly rate. Now, you can, over time, make a really great hourly rate because you're going to be selling more of those. That's why it's so important to do things to keep your store selling items, even when you're not listing or even when you're not doing anything to really push it forward. But that was a little depressing. I don't know. I thought the $50 items, and I don't know if Casey's in the chat yet or not, but I thought the $50 items, my friend, would blow away the $15 to $25 items just mathematically. But there's such a big time suck that you have to put in to get those items, whether it's the $50 items or it's the $15 to $25 items. That time suck cost you a lot in the beginning. And I think that's why a lot of eBayers, especially people who just start out, if you're just starting out, don't get discouraged, because this time suck in the beginning is going to be even worse for you because you're not going to be as efficient as someone who's been doing it for a while. So your hourly rate is going to be low. Let's be clear. It's going to be low unless you're just selling really super high profitable items. But I mean, I think this was a reasonable example. Now, you could argue that you could find $50 average sale price items cheaper than this, and that would help. That would help. Like, you wouldn't have to put up as much capital right off the bat, which would be nice, but you're still not going to sell any more of them. I mean, sell through is sell through. It's whatever it's going to be. And that's going to drive your gross revenue, which your profits and your hourly rate has to come out of that. So I would just say that overall, I don't know that it matters, guys. I mean, is that kind of what you take from this? That sell the high-priced items, sell the low-priced items, sell a mixture of them. Your hourly rate at the beginning, probably for several months, is not going to be that different given all these factors. And I would argue too that with these $50 items, there's more expertise and learning that comes into play to find those items, honestly, than it is to find $15 and $20 and $25 items. Those are a lot easier to find. They're easier to learn to find, whereas these items are a little bit tougher. So it could take you even more time. You're gonna have to spend some time outside of sourcing. You're going to have to spend some research time, which you're going to have to do that with both of these models. But I think at the beginning, if somebody was just starting out and they said, hey, should I go source a whole bunch of items and sell them for a low price, or go source just a few items and sell for a high price? I would say, as long as your capital budget supports either model, do whichever one makes the most sense in your area. Do whichever one cuts down on your sourcing time, because that's going to be the variable you can control. As you get better at sourcing, you learn better spots, or the spots that are around you, you find the ones that work better. I would say it doesn't really matter which model you choose for your hourly rate, at least at first. And I got to admit, I was surprised by that. I did not see that coming when I sat down and look. I thought this would be far superior. And it is superior on the rate. One thing I would say that does lend itself to this approach, if you're only spending 18 and a half hours doing this, that is absolutely a part-time job for a lot of people, right? A lot of people could do this part-time and spend 18 and a half hours. No sweat. But not a lot of people could spend 42 hours sourcing 200 items a week. That would take a lot longer, and that would preclude you from working most other full-time jobs. So you could do this one more in your part-time, which would be cool. But again, I think the hourly rate doesn't matter. I really don't think it matters that much. Now, Casey asked about the refunds, and were you worried about getting these items back? You know, I mean, your your return rate is a function of how accurately you describe your items, as well as your particular niche, and is it going to generate a lot of returns based on the type of items that are in it. Clothing is usually going to have more returns than, say, new in the box video games. Or maybe video games not the best example, maybe books. Because people, you know, and plus his assumption, his question was that if somebody spent $50 and they returned it, you'd have to keep more cash on hand in case of returns, which is true, but you're still going to have a return rate percentage that you can look at and say, okay, 3% of my items come back as returns. I'm selling 100 a month. That means 3 are going to come back on average, and they're $50 each. So I'm going to need to keep $150 in my PayPal account for returns every month. Not a hard problem to figure out. I don't sweat returns like I used to. I used to get all aggravated and frustrated by them, but now it's just like, it's just another math problem to figure out, and then you just deal with it. So, but yeah, I'm curious. Your questions, your thoughts on this. The Seam Store says, I missed it. Is the $50 average selling price with or without shipping? Either way, Seam, because you could say the $15 to $25 sale price could be that way too. Obviously, that changes some of the math, but let's assume that you price in the shipping in both models. That would be, and because that's what I would tell you to do anyway. You don't want to lose money on shipping, right? Let's see what other people are saying here in the chat. But Connie says, isn't this like any other business? In the beginning, you're in the red, but eventually you turn it around. That's a great point, Connie. I think yes to a point, but I can tell you as being a YouTube reseller, how many people will contact me and say, hey, you're giving away all these secrets, and people will just go on and flood the market with new sellers. Because they forget that very point, that it is hard at the beginning. You will make a lot of mistakes. You will lose money on things. You will lose your shirt on shipping a time or two. You will make customers mad. And people forget those parts. And they forget that that is part of it and that they're going to lose money. I don't know that you should really be losing money in the beginning, but you're not going to be making a lot. Especially when you think about, if you got to buy $1,600 worth of $2 items every month in the first month, you now have spent $1,600 to gross maybe $1,600. And that's if you were at the high end of the sell through, which means you're not getting really that great a return on your investment. Now, granted, over time, you will make more return on that investment into your inventory, but at the beginning, it's not the best. Let's see. I don't want to lose money during shipping. Nope. And you shouldn't, Elizabeth. You should not. Let's see. Mr. Sadie, what's up? Sadie says, I sell a bit of everything. Vintage, collectible. It would be very hard to put a set chart on my business. I may sell 5 items at 30 and 1 for 300. My profit goes up and down like crazy. Right. But if you took all your items and averaged them together, you would have an average. If you do it over a fairly long period of time, and it could tell you something. Or you could break it out by category even and say, in this category, my average is this. I mean, the profit or the metrics on your numbers are there, whether you figure them out or not, and whether you take the time to compute them. And there's a lot of them you don't need to, excuse me. But you can always break your business down to whatever its averages are. You're just, that's just the way it works. Very helpful to know your net profit any given time. Use QuickBooks and can see daily what mine is for the year. Very helpful. Illinois Picker says, yep, totally agree there. Always good to be looking at your net. Susanna says, I think selling higher dollar items makes more sense. You don't have to list as much, plus your profit is higher. It is, but I was looking at this, Susanna, as a function of what is your hourly rate given these two models. And while the higher dollar item is higher, it's not twice as high, despite the fact you're selling the items for more than twice as much, which I thought was interesting. You lose so much income, you lose so much opportunity cost in just getting the items and getting them listed that it depletes the profitability in them in terms of an average hourly rate. So Yvonne says, always best for newbies to sell stuff from their home or donations from fam. Yeah, you can go that way for sure. But you know, I think if you've got a source of cheap items near you, you could always take a test run and say, I'm going to buy 10 items or 20 items and see how it goes. Let's see. The average can be misleading if the variance is large. Right, Diego. And we never are going to know the variance. Diego is using a good statistical term there because our sample size is not big enough. We would need a sample size of like a whole niche on eBay. That would give us some statistical meaningful data, but we don't easily have that. And all we have it is backwards in time. So it's always going to be a little bit backward looking, and we're going to make a guess based on what's happened in the past. And we can do that. Let's see. I wish I had your spreadsheet skills. Self-taught, selling hustler. I mean, for sure. Let's see. Too many people focus on those gross sales, which don't mean anything if you're not really making a good profit. Exactly, Illinois Picker. Totally agree. If you're not making a good net on all these items, you're out. Because remember, the hourly rate I showed you guys was just your gross hourly rate. I don't know if that's really the right term, but it's really just taking the hours you've spent and dividing that into what gross revenue you bought in. Your true hourly rate is lower than that. Definitely down in the single digits in both examples by far when you start out. Now, as you keep going and you keep selling more and more of those items, think about it this way, like you sink cost into something. And the cost here is your time and your sourcing capital. You have these sunk costs into an item, and then, or items, a batch of items, and those items start selling and you start recouping the cost. But they don't sell all at once. They sell over a period of time, sometimes a long period of time, sometimes months or even years. So you don't recoup your investment for a long time. You're investing your time and capital in product today to sell it tomorrow, next week, 6 months from now, next year. And so to really figure out your true hourly rate on that amount of time that you invested would take a long time. You'd literally have to sell all those items and keep track of them and see what your time was worth over that. Kind of like we did with the 100 jeans that we did the video on last year. Let's see what else we got here. Great questions today, guys. We got 101 people watching, so thanks for that. If you're enjoying the content, please hit the like button. It's right down below the player, and it lets me know I'm doing a good job. And I do appreciate it. So let's see. What you sell makes a huge difference. I buy less now than I did back in May when I went full time, but I sell newer items faster and for more. If you can sell newer items for more money faster, that's a great model for sure. What if you don't care how many hours you work and enjoying it all the while? Elizabeth says, hey, then enjoy the ride. You know, I mean, if that's your reason for being with all this, then absolutely doesn't matter what your hourly rate is. It's more just about enjoying the experience. Is this report going to change anything you are currently doing? No, because that's a good question, Yvonne. Actually, I like that question a lot. It's not going to change anything because I have put a lot of sunk cost into understanding the niches that I sell in, which is mainly jeans and some shoes. And there's no reason to change that. Like I've already sunk that cost in. I can be profitable in those. It's going to come off as sounding like bragging, but I'm incredibly efficient when it comes to sourcing and photographing and listing those things and dealing with any questions and pricing. I mean, I'm really efficient at those. So my hourly rate I mean, it's not maximized because you can never maximize it, but it's as high as it's been for those items because I understand how to sell those items on, at a maximum peak efficiency and also how to source them. So there's no reason for me to really change any of that. Let's see, what other questions? Seems like sell-through needs to be way higher than your example. Way higher for what, Mitzi? I'm not sure what you're asking there, but I think I know. Some stuff at no profit is okay, but you need high volume in the bulk items to need to be in profit. Your overall month total should put you in profit. True. I totally agree there, Duncan. No argument. Let's see. James Brown says, I seem to be selling items lately that have been in my inventory for months now. Not that I'm complaining because I'm glad to see it sell. And see now, James, you're recouping the cost that you put into those items in time and sourcing budget, months ago. And now you're recouping it. And it's like I always give an example. It's not just what something will sell for, it's when will it sell. Like, for instance, you might say, if I said to you, hey, here's this $1 item that will resell for $1,000, $1,000. Do you want it? Your first question should be, well, when's it going to sell? Because if it's not going to sell for 100 years from now, I mean, that's an extreme example, and we never really know the answer to that question. But the point behind it is very valid, that the time it takes to sell matters too. So how long are you willing to wait for that profit? You could take that $1, or say it was even $10 or $100, and flip that into other items that will sell in a much shorter time frame and maybe recoup more than that $1,000. So it's always a matter of putting in the least amount of money possible, getting the greatest return possible in the shortest amount of time possible. And I borrowed that from my buddy Luke, Endless Entrepreneur, so I can't take full credit for that, but he's right. Is 3% the average you showed for sell-through rate? No. 1.5 was the highest, Mitzi. That was the highest we showed. 3% is a very high sell-through rate, but I've heard of people with sell-through rates that high, 3% per day. That's very quick. That means you'd be turning over your whole inventory theoretically in just over a month, which is fast. But there are categories and so on that do sell very, very quickly. Let's see. $1,000. I'll sit on it for months. LOL. Right. But as I said, suppose it was going to take 100 years. You wouldn't do it then. Doesn't make sense. So let's see. The bigger the margin, the longer I will be willing to wait. Yeah, and you're right, Chris, to a point. And it's a guess, right? It's somewhat of a guess about how long you're going to have to wait, and what could you do with that money in the interim if you weren't putting it into that item. If you're trying to invest that money in better inventory, or maybe it's the stock market or real estate or whatever you're going to put it in, or maybe you just need it to spend to live. Those are all worthwhile expenses as well. So that's really the question you got to ask yourself. What could I use that money for in the interim if, while I was waiting, if I'm not waiting for that item to sell? And that's it. That's a question you should ask yourself with every item. Like, theoretically, you're always thinking that. Like, if I buy this, that means I can't buy all these other things that are the same price. Or some fraction of it. And so is it worth buying this, knowing it'll probably sell in this amount of time for this amount of money? And that's always somewhat of a guessing game. But you've got to, and you can really only play that game in the aggregate. It's really hard to play that game with just one item. And thinking, well, I'm going to buy this item and it's going to sell for this amount within this amount of time. You can make a guess, and maybe it's a very educated guess, and maybe there's a very high probability that it will sell in that time. But there's some probability it will not. There's always that probability. So even if you think about a platform like Amazon, which has very good third-party apps that can show you sales velocity of certain items, specifically things like games and toys and tech and electronics at Christmas time can move very, very quickly. And lots of Amazon sellers will take those smaller margins because they know their sales velocity is going to be very fast. They're going to keep turning it over. They're going to get their money back out, put it back in, and they'll take, 15, 17, 18, 19% margins because they know they're going to turn over so many items. But even there, it's still somewhat of a guess because a big player, a group of big players could come in and tank the listing. Your margin could drop down to single digits. Your account could get suspended or banned. I mean, anything could happen. That item could get restricted. I mean, you never truly know. You just have to make an educated guess based on the information at hand. Sorry, that was a really long explanation. Oh, man, lots of good questions today. Thank you guys for that. Reselling at a higher price after a long period of time is similar to investing in real estate, but on a much lower scale. Yeah, I'd agree with that, Connie. I think you're right about that. That is true. But for most resellers, it's hard to make that make sense for most resellers. And again, it goes into what's your definition of at a higher price and how long a period of time is. But like I will buy a pair of jeans for $1, $2.25 my Ben's price, even $5 my local thrift store price. If I know it will sell for $30, even if I have to wait a year or a year and a half, it doesn't take up a lot of room. Could I flip other items in the interim? Yes, but I'd have to put in more time to do that, right? So it's not like a straight one-to-one trade-off. People forget that. They say, well, I don't want to have an item setting for a long time because I could take the money I was going to spend on that item and buy another item, sell it, buy another item and sell it. But you had to go find that item, source that item, photograph that item, list that item, pack and ship that item. So it wasn't like you did it, you spent more time doing it too. It's not just a straight profit calculation. And people forget that part of it. And then they work those 42 hours a week, like in the first example. And then they get to the end of the month and realize, wow, I worked, 168 hours this month. And I don't really have that much profit because you work so much that you really didn't get that much back out of it, selling a lot of lower cost items for very little profit. So there's sort of a trade-off there. People forget that part. It's not just about how long you're willing to wait and could you do something else with that money. That's part of the calculation. But with eBay, which is more time intensive in some ways, if you're gonna buy one item and sit on it and you decide that's not a good strategy, instead you're gonna buy a bunch of other items in the interim and sell those quicker, but maybe for less profit, you're also gonna spend more time doing that. So your hourly rate may be the same, may go down, may go up. Kind of hard to say. Depends on what the item is and how much it sells for. There's that velocity word again. Must have watched BH this morning. Nope, actually I did not, but I will check that out, Adam. Bonafide Hustler must have had a video talking about sales velocity. Depends on whether you have more time or capital available. Well, you never have more time. You've only got a certain finite amount. So you always know the value of that in a given period. You always know how much you have in a day or a week or a month, what have you. Capital can be gotten. I mean, you can earn capital, you can take on investments or make investments, you can take on partners sometimes. I mean, there's other ways to get capital and that you never really can get any more of. Have you sold your first item you ever listed? Does Face tell you the answer to that question? Let's see. Yeah. So Sadie says, I can average profits for the last 30 days, for example, but means very little going forward because a huge difference I experience with my items cost profit for my business model. Yeah. And if you're fluctuating and changing it a lot, Sadie, then that makes sense. Does this apply to those of us who also make handmade items and sell them on Etsy as well as reselling on eBay? Well, that's a great question, Mary. And I'm going to ask you a question back. My question back to you would be, how much time do you spend making that item versus sourcing that item in the examples I gave? It may be less. It may be more. I have no idea. Your profit margin is probably going to be, I suspect your profit margin is not going to be any better. But I could be wrong. I don't know the selling price. I don't know your particular item. But you've got some cost of materials. You obviously have your time cost to make the item, assemble it, put it together. And then it's going to sit for a while and sell, at some point for some amount. And you would need to figure out, does it make more sense for me to sell those handmade items? And maybe do some of both. And if you just enjoy making the handmade items, you should absolutely do that, because doing something you enjoy is always a good use of your time for the most part, as long as it's, healthy and good for you. But I don't, that's a great question about the Etsy example. But I think it's comparable in that you just need to figure out the time it took to make that item. That me too, man. Let's see what other questions are. Okay, so wow, 100 viewers. Well, that is amazing. Well, thank you guys very much for coming out on a Friday. It is very rainy and snowy here in the Queen City, so we're going to hunker down for Snowmageddon or whatever is heading our way. Probably be a bunch of nothing. But I am so glad you guys turned out. Check the description down below. The pre-sale for the spreadsheet that allows you to track your Amazon or eBay sales is still going on. There's a cool discount code. You've got, it's the first link in the description. As well, there's a bunch of other cool links there for a lot of other stuff. And anything you do like that, guys, always helps out this channel. And I truly, truly appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. I only put out items and only support things that I think will help you guys and be really valuable to you. And I really appreciate this, appreciate the support you've given me. So I hope you have an awesome weekend. Go out there and find those $15, $20 items or $50 items. Pick your poison, whatever you can find, and let me know how it goes. So we'll be back on Monday with another show, and we'll see you guys on Monday, probably at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So set the little alarm for that. Kaaren will be back, I'm sure. She's just in the other room. And again, I hope you have an awesome weekend. And this is Prof Sales saying good sales to you.